want to welcome you again to the fabulous leadership lecture series that we offered together with Book Passage and our terrific sponsor, the Oprah Magazine. And I also wanted to thank tonight our very wonderful partner in our many community projects, actually, the Marin Women's Commission. Commissioners, thank you so much for being here tonight and for supporting this evening. Could we please thank the Women's Commission for also supporting this? Now, I just to do a couple of housekeeping things, just to make sure that you are aware that when we offer these lectures, we do it as a way to extend to our community. Our students are in the house tonight. Our psychology majors, are you here? Our counseling psychology, let's hear it. Yes, and our science majors. And your revered faculty who have encouraged you to join us this evening and to invite our neighbors to come to talk about important ideas about leadership, about how the world has changed, both individually, organizationally, and in society around important ideas. And we have a great speaker tonight who's going to do that for us. Her work is renowned, and she certainly fits within the great list of speakers we've had before, some of whom are people like Vice President Al Gore, Isabel Allende, Susie Orman, Bill Bradley, a whole cast, Paul Hawken, Daniel Goleman, great people in multiple different disciplines. So thank you all for coming. I wanted to introduce my very dear colleague and friend, Dr. Martha Nelson, who is the Dean of the School of Health and Natural Sciences, who will introduce Dr. Brizendine. Dr. Nelson?
Thank you, Denise. It's my honor to introduce our special guest tonight. She is a distinguished Marin resident. She lives just down the road in Sausalito. Dr. Louann Brizendine graduated from Yale Medical School, and she completed her internship and residency at Harvard. She is board certified in psychiatry and neurology, and she is an endowed clinical professor at the University of California in San Francisco. In 1994, she founded the UCSF Women and Teens Mood and Hormone Clinic and continues its Women and Teens Mood and Hormone Clinic, and she continues to serve as its director. And this was the first of this kind of clinic to study gender differences in the brain and the behavior and hormones in the country. She then decided, in 2006, her first book, The Female Brain, earned high praise from readers and from critics, and it climbed the New York Times bestseller list. Then she decided to take a look at the other half of the human species, and she studied the male brain. In her new book, The Male Brain, A Breakthrough Understanding of How Men and Boys Think, Dr. Brizendine integrates the latest scientific research with observations from her clinical practice, and she puts this in a format that is reader-friendly. If the female brain was a must-read for all women and for the men who love them, then the male brain is for men and the women who are doing their best to love and understand them. So the time has come now for Dr. Brizendine to tell you about the book herself. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Brizendine.
Is this on? Great, thank you. Thank you all for coming tonight. I'm going to stand out here where I can actually see you, and I don't have to stand exactly in the lights for this, but tonight I'm very happy to be here to talk with you about my new book, The Male Brain. Just so I get an idea of the audience tonight, how many of you had read parts of The Female Brain, or at least of the other half? Okay, great. So a lot of you you know that the style is not too hard to read. When you put the word brain in a title, I think it sometimes scares people away. They think it's going to be too hard to read. So those of you that have read it know that it's told through stories, and so anybody can read it, whether they've had any science or not. You know, when I was in medical school, I remember one day sitting in class, and this is in the 1970s, and my professor was explaining a study, and I found it very, very interesting, and so I raised my hand and I said, you know, what were the sex differences in the study? He replied, oh, well, we don't study the sex differences, it would mess up the data. And sad to say, but I was such a scientist in those days, I thought, oh, of course you wouldn't want to mess up the data. So, but over the years, I've contemplated that experience, and, you know, we haven't really studied that much about sex differences in the brain until recent years, in the past decade or so, when we've had sophisticated technology in terms of MRI scans and other types of ways to study the brain, where we can actually look at the differences between male and female brain. And up until this last decade or so, we have basically thought that there was a unisex brain. Scientists now know there is no unisex brain, but all of you in this audience probably already knew that. At any rate, up until, now this is in the 1970s and 80s, and you know, up until recently, all medical research was done with males. And even the birth control pill was studied first on males. So medical research, and that's not for any nefarious reason whatsoever, it's mostly because, well, first of all, you wouldn't want to mess up the data, right? But on the other hand, it's very difficult in research to study females who are especially a young age and might be pregnant and you don't want to injure the fetus. So I think, you know, for various kinds of reasons, we didn't know for many years what the effect of some drugs are on females, but now it's mandated at the NIH that you must study both males and females, even if you're studying just about anything, unless you say, I'm studying testicles, and then you're allowed to use only males, or you're studying ovaries, and then you're allowed to study only the females. So what we do know now is that, we got our cell phones off, I'm sure, already. In the fetal life, so let's go back to the very beginning, and at conception, you know that we all start off with what's called female-type brain circuits. And nature's default pattern is female until 8 weeks of gestation, when the tiny testicles start to produce huge amounts of testosterone that marinates the brain, changing the circuits into male brain circuits, so that by the time we're all born, we are either born with a male brain or a female brain. And that does things like marinate and fertilize areas like the area for sexual pursuit in the male brain, which is deep in the hypothalamus of the male brain, and it grows to be 2.5 times larger in the male brain than in the female brain. And in rats, actually, the male brains have 7.0 times larger than the female. So in lots of mammals, that's the role and the job of the male, is to sexually pursue the female of all the species, because that's how you get procreation and the survival of our species. So, at any rate, let's take a look a little deeper. If we were able to saw off the skull and the brain, take a little bit of a look down inside here, I want to show you, if we can see these little green areas. You all see the green areas there? Those are the areas that are more active in the male brain, and the reddish rose-colored pink ones are the ones that are more active in the female brain. Now, you know, we talked about that area for sexual pursuit being larger in the male. You can see that green area right there, which is 2.5 times larger in the male brain than the female. And all of these areas have been studied to be more active in one sex than the other. Now, if we took a look a little bit deeper, and let's start with the female brain, shall we? And I know Dr. Ghosh is going to particularly like this piece of the work down here in the front row. So this is one of your science professors here. This next slide will help you look a little deeper into the female brain. I particularly like the need for commitment hemisphere. Can those of you over on this side see? And I like the chocolate center. That's one of my favorites, is the big chocolate center up there. And then the indecision nucleus, of course. jealousy, listening, and one of my favorites is the shoe and handbag coordination center. You see that part right up there? I like that one. Telephone skills, shopping, listening, and you see that little area for sex, and it says, see the note below. So those of you in the back, I'm going to read the footnote for you. It says, footnote, note how closely connected the small sex cell is to the listening gland. So what do you all suppose is in that big fat area right in the center in the male brain? Somebody there already knows. Somebody knows. So for those of you over there, you see the crotch scanning area, like the crotch scanning area, the toilet aiming cell, domestic skills. I like that tiny dot that says ironing. I don't think my son even knows what an iron is. I particularly like this section over here for those of you that it says, avoid personal questions at all costs. And the footnote on this one says, listening to children cry in the middle of the night gland is not shown due to its small and underdeveloped nature. It says best viewed under a microscope. I'll show you why that is and isn't true a little bit later, but that was the... So now that you know all about the male brain and the female brain, I wanted to tell you a little story about sort of the origins of how I got interested in this field. I was an undergraduate at UC Berkeley in the 1970s, and I was lucky enough as an undergraduate to be the first graduating class actually to get an undergraduate degree in neurobiology. And I got to study under some of the greats like Frank Beach and Marion Diamond. And Marion Diamond actually is still alive and teaching at UC Berkeley. But remember, this is when I was 19, 20 years old, and it's the 1970s, and I was very much a part of the feminist movement. And for those of you wondering, yes, I did burn a few bras, not my own, but somebody else's. A lot of us women said, you know, when we have our own boys, we are going to give them gender-neutral toys. We're going to raise these boys to be sensitive guys, and our future daughters-in-law will thank us for raising such sensitive husbands for them. Weren't we cocky? However, this changed when we all had our own sons. And I can remember thinking how brave I was to give my son gender-neutral toys. And one Christmas, I got him not only the action figure that he was asking for, I got him a Barbie doll. And he rips open the box, pulls her out by the torso, and uses those long legs as a spear, fighting off imaginary enemies. So I thought I'd bring for you tonight and show you what his favorite toy that year was, or at least a facsimile of that. This was... Does this look like the 4-year-old boy? This definitely was one of the many action figures. I think we still have them somewhere up on the shelf, and my step-grandson is visiting now. I think he's having a heyday with them. At any rate, nobody teaches boys and girls how to act like a boy or girl. The rough and tumble play of boys is well known even throughout all the animal kingdom. And of course, little girls and little boys do lots of things similarly, but I wanted to bring you a couple. Like, here's the little girls talking to each other. Little girls do relationship-type play often. They will give you role assignments, like you be the daddy and I'll be the mommy. Or you be the doctor, I'll be the patient. So little boys will do that as well, but they're quickly bored with that and they're often running to something else. And little boys, you know, they like the making sure you strangle your little brother. And at any rate, I think it goes back to that girls and boys do lots and lots of things similarly, but they do a lot of things differently that we don't teach them how to do. Although culture does play a lot into building how we do gender behavior over our lives. These two characters, do they look familiar to anybody? They look like they're up to no good. I'd like to see what's on that computer screen, wouldn't you? The reason I thought this was cute was this happens to be at the age where boys 9, 10, 11 start to have what we women and mothers refer to as that boy smell. Anybody in the audience? Any women in the audience? transport a lot of boys this age in the back of their car. What do you immediately do as soon as they pile in? Down with the windows, exactly. Now, interestingly enough, that boy smell, it's not BO quite yet. It's definitely can be stinky socks, but it smells more acrid. And that is the beginning of their sweat glands releasing androstenedione or various kinds of androgens that females are still able to smell, but actually at puberty, boys stop being able to smell that at some point. But it's an indication that his testicles have started pumping out testosterone. And I think one of the most remarkable things that I talk about in the book is that this ramping up of testosterone from age 9 years old to 15 increases 20-fold. It would be like at age 9 drinking a cup of beer, but by 15 you're drinking close to 2 gallons of the stuff. So certainly all of those circuits that were laid down in fetal life, and remember, the boys and girls go through something called the juvenile pause when there are very, very low hormones of testosterone and estrogen, and they start to ramp up during these years of teen years. And the boys start a couple years later than the girls, of course. These hormones, particularly the testosterone, starts to run the circuitry like that area for sexual pursuit or having, say, fantasies about girls' body parts starts to happen. And those of you who've read the book in the Teen Boy Brain chapter, I talk about sometimes boys that are 13 and 14 start having these thoughts. They kind of think they're pervs until they realize all the other guys are also thinking the same thing. It's a natural, normal part of starting one's masculinity and starting to search out the female at that stage. He'll also spend a fair amount of time behind closed doors, and we mothers learn to keep our mouth shut, but he disappears into his own world. He may look a lot of his anatomy and be very worried whether he's adequate or not, and that will sort of probably remain, women in the audience don't know that has actually been shown in a recent study of over 50,000 people. Men are 85% of males worry something about how their genitals appear. And yet females are happy with their partner. I think men don't realize that most women are very happy with them, and some men, though, worry about aspects of that part of their anatomy, and it certainly starts at that age. We women are always obsessed with that. That's nothing new to us, but we should know that guys have the same issue as well. Now here is the other half of the equation, the teen girl half, and at this stage, their brains are becoming what? Quite obsessed with appearance, physical appearance, and becoming and being sexually attractive to boys. Hair, makeup, outfits, etc., fitting in with their peer groups. And you might note that all of these girls are wearing a couple of them, skimpy outfits. I can remember talking to my son as he hit the high school age when girls would wear very skimpy things to class, and he'd say, "Yeah, Mom, it's really hard sometimes to take my eyes off of them." So the torture of teen boys in the classroom is something that's probably well known to some of you in this audience who teach teenagers. Now, what's going on in the female brain at this stage? Well, her brain is transitioning to making an 8-lane superhighway for processing emotions. All guys are having the small country road version of that. But you guys are busy building O'Hare Airport as a hub for processing thoughts about sex, while females have the airfield nearby that lands small and private planes. So that's what's happening in the teen years. We get lots of remodeling going on, and this happens for boys up until age 21 or 22. Their brain is not completely finished, and girls finish at about age 19. So I think that this issue of having a lot of expectations that decisions are going to be carefully considered and thought out at a younger age is something that society needs to maybe bump the age up a little bit on some things. boys a little bit longer than girls. Now, transitioning over to a stage where we get to the point where we've selected, shall we say, the one and only, the transition of the 20s and up to age 30 or so for boys, when they have chosen the woman they'd like to be with. And hopefully, you know, these things are so much in the news lately, you know, monogamy versus whatever, but committing to one woman and getting ready to start the next phase of life, the daddy brain phase. And I think that this phase was a phase I found in doing the research for this book the most surprising to me, because I was very interested to know that the pheromones released by the sweat glands of the pregnant partner wafted over into the male nostrils and stimulated his brain to make 30% more prolactin, which is a hormone, makes milk in females, of course, prolactin, prolactation. And yet, scientists still don't know what it's doing in the male. It also is causing his testosterone to go down by 30 to 35%. And scientists believe or hypothesize that that is an aspect of fatherhood to kind of keep him at home, and he's not out chasing every fertile, curvaceous female out in public at that point. He's going to stay at home and take care of the baby. The other thing that happens, interestingly, in the daddy brain is, you know, they've done brain scan studies and auditory testing and seen the auditory circuits in the male brain change from before his wife is pregnant till 9 months later. The change is that he is not able to hear babies cry as easily before, but by the time his baby is born, his hearing to hear infants cry has actually improved quite a lot. So that by the time his baby is born, a father is also ready to take charge of taking care of his child as well. So I found that after having written the mommy brain and done all the research for the female brain, thinking that was such a female aspect, to find how much biological attunement a dad or the daddy brain actually gets too is quite astounding to me. And of course, another aspect of being a daddy that I discovered in doing the research is, you know, dads don't behave the same towards their children or their babies when the mom is around. There's lots and lots of studies that show that what's called infant-parent synchrony. So that lovely kind of reciprocity you see here doesn't develop as well if dads aren't allowed to spend some alone time with their babies. So there's a body of research that looks at mothers who are called sort of hyperactive, what are called gatekeepers, and they won't let anywhere near their baby or won't let the baby go with the dad without being around. So I would encourage moms to try and trust the dads a little more and let them spend some alone time with their babies. So that's some very interesting work, a lot of it done by Ruth Feldman for probably the last 25 or 30 years. She's done some, for those of you who are the psychology students in the audience, you might want to take a look at her work, her beautiful work. And this guy, obviously, is the new version of fatherhood, probably in Germany, because any of you know how long paternity leave is by legal statute in Germany? Anybody know? Actually, I heard someone say a couple of years, it's 14 months of paternity leave. Wow, I know. So I say that the German male is going to be the new model of fatherhood for the world. The German women always laugh at me because they still end up doing most of the housework. However, they do have a little phrase in Europe for Fridays. You know what they call the day Friday? Call Friday Daddy's Day. It's evidently lots of dads that do access some paternity leave take Friday off and they stay home with the kids on Fridays. The women still end up doing most of the housework, however. Not surprising. But at any rate, I love this photo because it kind of demonstrates how competent dads actually are if we would just give them a chance. Okay. Now, what's this guy doing? He's fixing something. And I wanted to give you, those of you that have a copy of the book in your hand, you see what's on the front cover is that brain built out of duct tape. And that's an homage to the fact that the male brain is, males fix things. And the search for quick solutions to things, I think, is an aspect of the male brain that I go into a lot in Chapter 6 called The Emotional Life of Men. The reason being is that males use some of the same circuits that we women do for emotional circuitry, of course, but they switch very quickly into a system called the TPJ system that allows them to sort of Google search their whole brain to come up the solution very quickly in an emotional situation. For example, how many of you women in the audience have brought a problem to the man in your life and said, honey, you know, I happened to work today and so it's so awful and I'm so upset about that, you know what she did today and she's always doing blah, blah, blah. And you know, the look on his, he immediately says, what does he say? He says, honey, you know what you should do? Anybody ever have that? The honey, I know what you should do phrase? That's because his brain has found a solution very quickly already, and he's actually trying to help you. It's actually a loving thing that he's doing. He's helping you. However, we women do not experience it that way because, take a look at this couple here. He's saying, but I'm only trying to help you. And she's saying, but you don't know how I feel. So, if I can teach one thing to the men in the audience today, and my husband will attest to this because I have a little yellow sticky that I put on his computer that says this, and we have a little running joke about it. But the men, if you could first say the following words to her before you launch into the solution. Honey, I know how you feel. And my husband, who's sitting in the front row here, I may be outing you a little bit, dear, but I'm going to tell a little story besides the yellow sticky on the computer that says, honey, I know how you feel, which he actually reads out loud, even though it's scripted, before he launches into the solution, like, I know what you should do, or you know what you should do. It actually makes me feel better and have a more open mind to hear what he has to say. But the story I'm going to tell you is he told me the other day, I didn't know this until recently, but he said, you know, I've actually used that with my daughter. And his daughter's in her 40s, and she and her father have a very, very close relationship, and they talk frequently on the phone. He says, you know, I've used that with her before I launch into telling her what to do, and it seems to be working really well. So, honey, thank you for sharing that story with me. I love that story. At any rate, okay, guys, try it out with your daughters and with your wife. The honey, I know how you feel statement. Okay, now I'm going to teach women something for you gals, because something that I learned through doing clinical work for the last 20 years. And here's a couple. I often have couples who come to my office. I get the phone call, and I know the phone call comes, and it says, Dr. Brizendine, you've got to see me. You've got to save my marriage. And then she'll say, you know, he says if I don't start having more sex or wanting sex, he's going to leave me, or he's going to have to find somebody else, or we're headed for divorce. You know, it's some version of that. And it's a crisis. And she said, if it were me, I wouldn't care, but he really cares a great deal. So I'll get them in my office, and I'll say to him, John, how do you know that Mary loves you? And he'll say, oh, because she wants to have sex with me. Mary's face is just stunned because that. And I'll turn to her and say, Mary, how do you know that John loves you? And she says, well, because he wants to cuddle and talk with me. And his face at that point is stunned. I would say that the crux of the story is that the expression of love and feeling that a man is loved may come in a more sexual direction, perhaps, than it does for us women. And if that part of a man's life is not going well with his partner, it doesn't have to do necessarily with quantity of sex, but just that she wants him as a sexual partner, means a lot to him. And so here is the take-home message for women. For those of you in the background who can't see this guy, he's crawling on his hands and knees towards the bed where she's reading a book. Maybe she's even reading The Male Brain, you know. And he's saying sex, sex. So you don't want to end up with your bedroom looking like this is something I would say for the women in the audience, that it has a different meaning to males versus females. We females like to be wanted by our husbands as well in that way, but in terms of the love piece of that and the meaningfulness of men when it's not going well, I think is something for us to take deeply at heart. Now, there's a chapter in the book I can't really talk about much in public. It's chapter 4. It's called The Brain Below the Belt, that you can read in the privacy of your own home, but it may help women understand a little bit more about what's going on down there. And it's, yes, exactly, and maybe some men as well. So now we turn to the mature male brain, and I can see a lot of you in the audience, mature male brains. My husband has a mature male brain, and that's chapter 7 in the book, and I'm talking about the stage of life where males actually develop often a lot more patience. Their hormones, however, do not fall off a cliff like ours do. Our ovaries retire and we go with a plummeting estrogen. Men, however, do this. They do this little bit here. They start to go down at about between age 30 and 40, there starts to drop a little bit and drops over a long, long period of time. And we have a name for that in medicine called andropause. It means the androgens are decreasing. And it's a time the males never fall off a cliff in terms of their testosterone, and many males have enough testosterone to run their sexual pursuit and sexual interest circuits into their 70s, 80s, and 90s. So it doesn't necessarily mean they don't have any sexual interest. But the testosterone goes down a bit, their actual relative amount of estrogen goes up a bit. And what is it that estrogen produces a lot of us in us females? It stimulates the production of oxytocin. Anybody ever heard of oxytocin? It's not OxyContin, it's oxytocin. It's what's called the love and cuddle hormone. It's actually the hormone that causes the uterus to contract and squeeze out the baby. It causes milk to squeeze out when you're breastfeeding. So it's an interesting hormone that's more plentiful in females, although males start to have more of it at this stage of life. Oxytocin, the cuddle hormone, we call it. So here's my version of the mature male brain. That men get a lot more cuddly, they get a lot more patient, they stand still a little bit more, and I think it's a wonderful time of life for men in the male brain. And so women who have hung around for a long time, ladies, you've got a lot of good years to look forward to. And I love this picture. I think this is a nice cuddly picture of the mature male brain. And of course, going into grandfather years, I know that around my household, my husband has had a big transition since he's had grandchildren. He's quite a sweet grandfather, and he has a lot more time and patience with his grandchildren than I think he did with his children. I think his daughters are quite amazed and delighted at the level of attention and interest that he pays to the grandchildren, and they actually are quite pleasantly surprised, dear. At any rate, I know lots. How many of you are grandparents in the audience? Is that something that you all have found to be true too? Is that your patience and tolerance for all kinds of things and little things that might have bothered you when you were a parent no longer are worth even worrying about? So I think those years also of the grandfather brain are a lovely time of life. And as a matter of fact, listen, you grandpas might even learn a few eye-hand coordination skills from your grandson. I know that's what goes around in our house is the computer and video games, and he might even be quite a lot better than you at quite a young age. So at any rate, I want to thank you tonight for having me and being such a generous, generous audience, and I really wanted to allow some time for questions because I know a lot of you have read both The Female Brain, and some of you in the audience have had a little sneak preview of the male brain as well. And I really would love for any of you to have feedback. We're having an interesting discussion. My publisher had me go on to Facebook and start on my Facebook page a little discussion. So you can go on to that and ask me any questions also there. How many of you know about Facebook? I didn't know about it until a few years ago, but they have a lovely way that you can just have a discussion with the author there. It's very, very easy. So I know some of the young people in the audience probably live on their Facebook. So any of you, where are the psychology students tonight? Where are they? In the back? At any rate, please feel free to ask more questions as you read the book, and anything that pops into your mind, feel free to send a question to me. So at any rate, thank you very much for your attention and for all of your loyalty with the female brain, and enjoying the male brain will be my deepest pleasure if it teaches you something and helps you understand and love the men in your life more. Thank you very much.